When I am not visiting the morning service, I am a music teacher, and I teach at an Orthodox Jewish school on the North Shore, Masada College. I think that has given me a fresh perspective on the Old Testament texts as I get to sort of look, from the sidelines, but get to share a little bit in Jewish community and tradition. So today's sermon I have entitled, "The Jesus of Your Imagination." I would like you to take a moment now and imagine you are walking down Glenmore Road. You are on your way to church, but due to the insane parking here in Paddington on a Sunday, you have had to park a 10-minute walk away. You are hurrying, you want to make it to church on time. You dodge poodles and schnoodles and frantic mothers balancing multiple coffee cups and screaming toddlers. And then you spot him. In downtown Paddington, you spot Jesus Christ. He waves gently and calls your name. You stand very still. You were definitely not expecting this. Jesus walks up to you and asks if it's okay for him to walk you to church. Pause for a minute and look at him. What's he like? What clothes does he wear? The colour? The cut? Just take a moment to notice. Cast your eyes to his face. What colour are his eyes? The shape of his eyebrows? How long is his beard? What colour is his skin? And what shade is his hair? Can you describe the texture? How many days do you think it's been since he last washed it? And the expression he wears, a smile, a look of serenity, or a concerned frown because you are running late for church. There is an Irish poet and author, now I'm going to mess this up, this is an Irish name, Pádraig Ó Tuama, I'm not sure, you can go home and look up how to pronounce it correctly. But in his book, In the Shelter, he remembers his days as a chaplain for school-aged children. One of the exercises he would run was an old Ignatian exercise, not too dissimilar to what I just asked you. He would ask the children to picture going for a walk and meeting Jesus. Pádraig reflects on some of the responses he would receive. He wrote, "One young person said, 'Jesus and I went to feed the ducks,' and many of them described Jesus' clothes. They went from unsurprising, he was a man in robes with brown hair, to the utterly surprising. One young person said, 'Pádraig, I was bored during the talk, so I used my own imagination to go where I wanted. I decided to take a walk to the sea, and as I was walking, climbing over the waves, I noticed Jesus coming towards me. He was in a purple tutu and wearing a coconut bra.'" In Lent, we give space to our inner world. We examine our thoughts, our desires, and we seek God's forgiveness as we prepare our hearts for Easter. As we attend to the spaces we make for God in our daily life, it also provides opportunity to consider the limitations we hold in our conception of God. So, who is the Jesus of your imagination? And for us as a community, who is the Jesus of our imagination? The author Anne Lamott writes, "You can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. I find this to be a terrifying reflection because it is absolutely true. We shape our understanding of God through our own experiences, our desires, fears, and understanding of the world in which we live. Just a few examples of the outworking of dodgy, dangerous images of God include terrorism in the name of God, the disregard of the planet, believing God's going to restore it anyway, the traumatic conversion therapy of LGBTQI folk, the stolen generation, the bizarre commitment of the religious right in America to Donald Trump, hiding sexual abuse and domestic violence within the church community, and the prosperity gospel, tricking many poor people to give to the church with the promise of God's favour and blessing. In this passage today from John, we meet a Jesus who likely challenges our preconceived ideas of who Jesus is. We meet a Jesus who gets angry, raises his voice, and throws furniture. As a school teacher, if this happened in my classroom, Jesus would get a suspension. And far from the meek and mild, gentle man who cradles lambs, we would find pictured on Sunday school posters. So why does Jesus behave like this? Why does he flip out? To understand this, we must examine the context for what was going on. Jesus chose this day very carefully. As the text notes, it was almost time for Passover. The Passover festival, or Pesach in Hebrew, commemorated the exodus of the Jews from slavery in Egypt and remembered how God passed over the houses of the Jews during the 10th plague on the Egyptians, the slaying of the firstborn. Jews would travel from far and wide to Jerusalem to celebrate Pesach, so on this day, Jerusalem would have been very busy. Unlike the church as we know, the temple was not merely a place of worship. It was the centre of the city's economic life. This was due to it being the destination for pilgrims travelling to Jerusalem for festivals, in this case Passover. Those visiting would have had to have paid half a shekel tax, and therefore the money changers' booths were used to trade for the appropriate amount. Further, pilgrims would need to purchase animals for sacrifice, as it was impossible for them to travel long distances with their own animals and maintain purity requirements. The temple, therefore, was the centre of wealth. It acted as a bank and a broker for the people of Jerusalem. It was able to offer small loans for Judean farmers, which were probably exploitative, and provide work for many of the local businesses. Further to this, political figures would meet within its grounds, and the high priest was a major political leader. So within the temple grounds, we had the wealthiest and most powerful people. And yet, this was taking place as the poor people of Judah were being oppressed and marginalised, forced to pay taxes which could leave them with little to no scope for a year with a bad harvest, forcing them to take out loans, driving them into debt further. With this context in mind, we realise Jesus did not merely throw a hissy fit at the temple, but he joins a long line of prophets who speak against the system in righteous anger. Here, Jesus performs an act of resistance, a very public, impassioned display that no doubt shocked and even scared many onlookers. By flipping the money tables, he shows he is about to flip the system. He points to himself as the new temple and the Easter story that awaits. Jesus paves the way for the community of God, a community so different from the temple he walked into, where the weak and the poor can approach God and not be oppressed and exploited. Instead, moving freely within the inner sanctuary of the temple courts, the place where the powerful could only access. And this can only be done because Jesus, as the Son of God, took the sin of the people and of you and I upon himself when he took to the cross. By giving himself as a sacrifice, we can now enter the Holy of Holies, the inner part of the temple where the high priest could previously go. We are now all equal in Christ. The weak are made strong, and the strong are made weak. In the 1 Corinthians passage, where Paul describes how the crucifixion of Jesus was mystifying the wise and providing a stumbling block for the Jews, we see them try to fit Jesus into their preconceived notions of who God is and what he should do, and of course, they fail. Let us listen carefully here. And in this Lenten season, we must not be bound by a limited imagination of God, but instead let it stretch. Let God teach us to reimagine, to reshape our spiritual landscape. We don't necessarily need to dress Jesus in a coconut bra to expand our thinking and understanding, but we must challenge the Jesus of our imagination and ensure he is one capable of righteous anger and hell-bent on social change. Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar, writes much about prophetic imagination. He says, if you take the phrase prophetic imagination, the imagination part of that is that prophets are able to imagine the world other than the way that's in front of them. The word prophetic alludes to the reality of God, And what the prophets believed deeply is that God is a lively character and a real agent who acts in the world, who causes endings and who causes new beginnings. Our role as Christians is to live with prophetic imagination, not to look into the future to see our future job, bank balance, or whether our cousin actually does marry that weird guy, but an imagination which can see the reality of God at work, to speak of God's commitment to his people and to his world. Brueggemann notes 4 ways prophetic imagination might play out for us as Christians. First, a new ecological perspective in which the earth and all of the creatures of the earth are treated like covenant partners who are entitled to dignity and viability. Every acre, every squirrel, every radish, every whale, every cornstalk is entitled to viability and respect. Number 2, a new ecumenism that makes room for other chosen peoples other than Western white Christians. Brueggemann fleshes this out. That does not mean that we Christians give up our claims about Jesus, and we are in the process of recovering Jesus. But it means to recognise that our claims about Jesus are not universal statements, but they are confessional statements about how we intend to live our life. And that means that we have to make room for other religious traditions and respect the viability of their claims and find allies where we can about the main prophetic tasks of justice and holiness. Number 3, a new economy organised around a love of neighbour that is committed to the viability of widows, orphans, and immigrants, a redistributive economy of respect and viability for vulnerable persons. And number 4, a new multiculturalism. As an American, Brueggemann writes that this new multiculturalism should oppose white nationalism to ensure that chosenness has to remain open, that God is in the business of choosing many other peoples. Now, if we go back to that initial exercise of taking a walk with Jesus, imagine you are taking a walk with him, but this time, imagine you are walking into parish council meetings, into synod, into Australian Christian lobby meetings, into Parliament. Look into the face of the Jesus who walks beside you. Look at him as wealthy churches give prosperity gospel messages, forcing those who can't afford dinner to dig further into their pockets, or dismiss racial violence and the plight of people of colour. Look into the face of Jesus when women's experiences of domestic violence and abuse are ignored. Look into the face of Jesus when yet another Christian minister, theologian, or politician makes it into the media for inappropriate relationships again. Look at his anger, his determination to make things new. Look at how he aligns himself on the side of the weak and not the strong. Our imagination must be long and wide. It must be prophetic. Our imagination must seek justice and newness. In this season of Lent, as we prepare ourselves for Easter, we must seek to see God afresh. We must allow our walk with Jesus to take us to very uncomfortable places where we see the sins of our community and ourselves, and where we can build a healthy, righteous anger to seek and work for change.